Let's get Keith Smith's take on the NBA season. And, of course, Keith, we started the season here in Philly just like they ended it with a pretty lopsided loss against the Boston Celtics. So I'll ask you to start things off here. How wide is the gap between Philly and Boston based on what we saw, or is that game not fair to really judge?
We got Keith?
Hey, I can hear you now, guys.
Okay,
right.
So, here in Philly, they lose to Boston again. They've lost, Embiid said it. It's not a rivalry. We keep getting our ass kicked. So, is it fair to judge how wide the gap is between these two teams based on what we saw on opening night? What is your take on these two organizations as they head into this season?
I think there's some level of fairness. Boston obviously has had a great deal of success with the 76ers over the last couple of years, including last year's playoff series. It's Joel Embiid's comments about getting their butts kicked every time. That's not necessarily true because there have been some close games in there, and they were right there in one of the playoff games and didn't pull it out, and then won another one. So that's a little bit mixed. But as far as this year, the challenge is, Philly just had nothing off the bench at all. I don't really say J.J. Redick off the bench because he started the second half rather and played most of the minutes in the game at his position. So, that left really next to nothing, for support behind the starters. And early in the year, when guys don't have their full wind and conditioning up, that's when you really need your bench to step up, and Philly just didn't have anything.
And all right, so if you say that here in Philly, hey, they didn't have Muscala and Chandler, of course, the people's like, yeah, that's really going to help them. Are they a help? I don't know if they help them win that game the other night, but do they make that matchup more even?
Yeah, it definitely makes the matchup more even, and I've seen a lot of that across, Twitter and whatnot of, hey, these guys, they don't really matter, and that's just, it's really kind of silly to put it that way because Wilson Chandler has been really good over the course of his career. He's going to give them another scoring option at the 3 and 4 position, give them a guy who can both score inside and outside, so he'll help. And then I think Mike Muscala is really being underrated. They don't have anything behind Joel Embiid right now. Amir Johnson is fine for about maybe 5 minutes a half, but what Muscala gives them is a little bit of a different look, a guy who can step out, knock down jump shots, plays passable defense inside, and that's in a lot of ways what they're missing. When they didn't have Embiid on the floor, they just had no one who could offer much of anything at that center spot.
Keith, the eye test on Markelle Fultz, just to get your opinion on that, and whether or not he should have played more in the second half. It seemed like we got enough, at least in the first half, good minutes against a really good basketball team, and at least here, the majority of the conversation is, while we're not calling him a bust, he certainly did not live up to the off-season hype that surrounded him working with Drew Hanlon and coming back with an improved jump shot.
Yeah, it was a struggle for him. The thing that worried me was just his confidence. He passed up shots. He passed up times, especially when he, got into the paint on the bounce. Those are plays where he lived off that in college. He'd get in there and, shoot those little fallaways or get all the way to the bucket. And one of the things that was made, a good point, I want to say was maybe Kyle Neubeck pointed, he's not even looking at the rim when he's, got the ball in his hands. He's really just kind of, moving the ball, a lot of sideways, action with him, not a lot going to the basket. So that's what worries me. I think it's going to be one of those things where you get him a few games, maybe a game, maybe even tonight against Chicago Bulls, who aren't a very good defensive team. Let him get his confidence up, let him get built, and then we can start to figure out where this kid's really at.
Yeah, and I think that's where people are drawing this line of frustration, Keith, which is how much time do we really need in a situation like Tuesday night where you're getting quality minutes, at least in the first half, you're not living up to it, versus, all right, well, you still need some time to let this kid breathe and go out there. It just looks like a month, maybe a month and a half before you start going into the territory, Keith, of does it start risking what you can do on the floor and winning basketball games?
Yeah, you're spot on. And, one half of opening night, that's certainly not enough, to make any kind of judgments on. But it's really, NBA teams will say it's right around Christmas is when you really have a good feel for your team. We might move that up a little as the season's now starting in mid-October versus late October. So you might be saying early December, about a month and a half in. And that's when you really have a good feel for what you have. The unfortunate thing for Philadelphia is they're not in a position where this is not development time anymore. Trusting the process time is over. This is winning time. And the challenge when you're trying to incorporate this guy and get him back is they're not good enough where they're blowing teams out and will be blowing teams out and will be able to say, hey, he's getting all his development time in games in blowouts. They're going to be in these tight games, and that becomes really tricky because it's balancing we got to find out what this kid is and what he can be for us versus we got to win this game tonight.
Keith, going off that, I mean, are the expectations too high for this team? Like how is it not development time? You have one of the best starting fives in the league last year. Then you take out Redick and you insert Fultz, who it's only been one game, but in that one game he struggled. And then Redick struggled coming off the bench a little bit. You have a couple guys injured. You got to expect Fultz, Embiid, and Simmons, that chemistry of that starting five to take some time and that confidence of Fultz to take some time. So are the expectations a little bit too high? Could we see some growing pains here with this starting lineup in Fultz for the next 4 to 6 weeks or possibly longer?
Yeah, you're certainly going to see the growing pains, as we said, and you just said you saw that on opening night. You're going to continue to see that. The other challenge is that with Chandler and Muscala out, the bench is really thin, so there's just not much there. The guys are kind of playing new roles, so you've got to figure that out a little bit. And you still have the fact that for Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, they're young players that are early in their career. They were so good last year that I think that almost gets forgotten somewhat, that just how young these guys still are. But the other piece, when you look at the other side, is they did go to the playoffs. They came in this year with the belief of we're going to be a really good team, and we think we can be in that upper echelon of the Eastern Conference and challenge for an NBA Finals berth. Well, if you're going to say that and act that way and your off season's going to lead to that, then you can't ask everybody, but be really patient with us and give us time. It's kind of one side of the coin or the other. There's time for players, but as a team as a whole, they've got to really put this together and win games early on to make sure that everybody stays confident in them.
Keith, one surprise I had, and I know you are much more in tune with the Celtics than I would be, but one thing I was apprehensive about in saying that the Celtics were going to be head and shoulders, better than the Sixers was Jason Tatum and how they would utilize him. In other words, I was surprised to see that he was kind of the guy the other night for them, right? I mean, did you look at it the same way? Like, to me, they got Kyrie Irving. He's not, playing second fiddle seemingly to anybody, especially a 20-year-old kid entering his second year. But it seems that the Celtics are ready to say, no, Jason Tatum, you're going to be our guy. Do you see it that way, or does that materialize as Kyrie gets more his sea legs under him?
Yeah, no one in Boston's going to come out and openly say anybody is the guy. What they're going to tell you is, we're comfortable with any of the players, taking any shot at any time and all that, coach speak and rah-rah stuff that everybody says at this time of year. But the reality is privately, they're going to tell you Jason Tatum is being built up to be on the level with Kyrie Irving, where they are the 1-2 punch that this team is going to have going forward. And the reality is they know it's going to take Kyrie a little while to get his rhythm back and to be fully comfortable. It's also going to take Gordon Hayward that time as well. So they're going to lean on Jason Tatum quite a bit because he's the most consistent offensive option that they have outside of Kyrie. And then Jaylen Brown will be leaned on slightly less because he's just not quite as consistent as Tatum is. But Tatum is going to be, he's going to feature more prominently in this offense than I think a lot of people who are close to the team expected.
Keith, let me bring you back to Brett Brown and the Sixers real quick because it's tough as a barometer, Brad Stevens and what Boston's doing up there. How and where do you expect Brett Brown or should Brett Brown get better, knowing that this team has had slow starts in the past and knowing that maybe Markelle Fultz's confidence is not something he can control versus rotations, getting tighter on defensive rotations, especially when you've kind of laid it out last couple of years that you are a legit defensive team. Where do you look for Brett Brown to get better so that we can actually have a conversation about him being a top 5 coach in the league?
Yeah, the thing that was odd to me, especially opening night, and they did this quite a bit at times last year, was they're not set up to be a switch everything team. It sounds odd because you have a lot of similarly sized guys, and Simmons and Covington and Saric and Fultz and even Redick when they're out there. Those guys should be able to hold their own, but they were switching Joel Embiid onto Tatum or onto Irving like it was no problem. Now, right. Embiid held his own on a handful of plays, and that's great. But more often than not, Tatum got great looks, especially when they had Embiid on him. So that's one change I would make. And then offensively, I'd like to see this team really focus on pushing the ball and getting out in transition and scrap the old school post-up game, because Boston was content to let them do that. They're going to let them, hey, you want to post Joel Embiid and take 20 seconds of the shot clock to work it into him on the post, that's fine with us. We're not going to worry about that at all, because all that's going to result in is either a turnover, which we saw several times, or, a really tough look for Embiid, generally making a move out of the post where he's still not overly comfortable at times.
Oh, what a great point, Keith, because even with the rule changes this offseason, the game has opened up more. It's faster, as you know, and there is still a group of people in the greater Philadelphia area who are following the Sixers team that demand Joel Embiid live and is cemented down in the post. And I think a lot of what you say is that teams are going to, okay, do that. We're just going to play faster, especially because the league is allowing it.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. What Boston did was they made it tough on them to make post-entry passes. It made them take most of the shot clock to get him the touch. Now he's getting a touch late clock where he's not overly comfortable. And then at that point, he's going against either Al Horford or Aaron Baines, who are two of the better defenders against him in the entire league. So that makes it a challenge. The other thing is this team is so shooting challenged that when you push the ball, you can steal early, quick offense out of pushing the ball that you're not going to get otherwise. And they've got great personnel to do that, especially as Embiid. He looked great early in the game, running the floor, especially as the trailer behind Simmons at times. And they've really got anybody who can kind of pull that ball down and get it up the floor quickly. And I think that's a way that they could steal some early offense, get some easy buckets, because if you want to play this half-court possession-style game, they just don't have the shooting to open up the floor and pull it off.
Keith Smith, at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. And, of course, we check in with him throughout the NBA season. And, of course, he appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline here on the Sports Bash, contributor for Real GM, Celtics blog, and more NBA avenues. Keith, appreciate the time as always.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm glad the season's back and up and running.